on Goblin Reddit. Today's story is...
My stepdaughter treated me like an ATM for 11 years, and when my wife revealed her darkest secret, I made a decision that changed our lives forever. At the age of 42, I married Maud, 39, a woman who already had a daughter named Remy, 17, from her previous relationship with Stan, 40. When we got married a decade ago, I was fully aware that Remy was part of the package, and I felt ready to take on a paternal role. I never wanted to have children of my own, so I considered this situation a perfect balance, enjoying family life without the pressure of having children. Maud and Stan ended their relationship when Remy was just 3 years old. As I understand it, the separation was not particularly traumatic, although they did not maintain a truly shared upbringing. Stan fulfills his financial obligations, but he spends little time with his daughter. I came on the scene when the little girl was 6. I met Maud 3 years after their separation during the wedding ceremony of some acquaintances. We struck up a conversation that quickly developed into mutual chemistry. At the end of the event, I asked her out, and she accepted. From that moment on, we were together. At first, everything seemed to flow naturally. We built a life together, and I believed that our union would be permanent. However, as time went by, I perceived transformations in our relationship that altered my perspective. I constantly strove to have a positive influence on Remy's life. From helping her with schoolwork to financing her recreational activities, I tried to guarantee her opportunities that I didn't have during my childhood. I even set up a university fund when I married Maud, because at that time, although we were not biologically related, I considered her my daughter. Fast forward to the present, and the situation has become complicated. Remy has developed an increasingly hostile attitude, particularly towards me. Initially, I attributed it to typical teenage rebelliousness, but the situation has only worsened. She behaves as if I were invisible, uses me as a source of financial resources, and frequently makes stinging comments about my lack of biological paternal bond. I have tried many times to establish honest dialogues to improve our relationship, but these attempts systematically fail. She typically responds with annoyed gestures and dismissive phrases. Last week, the situation reached a critical point. Remy was visibly irritated as she wandered around the house, making a fuss about something as trivial as running out of her favorite shampoo. I usually try not to make a big deal out of these incidents, understanding that teenagers have difficult days. However, this time it was excessive, especially because I had just invested my entire weekend helping her with an academic project. I repeatedly transported her to the library, acquired last-minute materials that I had forgotten, and stayed up late on Sundays to help her perfect her work. I hoped that these efforts would have earned me at least some gratitude, or at the very least, neutral treatment. Instead, she was dismissive and discourteous. She did not respond to my greeting, she left her belongings scattered about despite my request that she pick them up, and she muttered complaints about how annoying other people's rules were. When she made that pointed comment, I could no longer ignore the situation. I decided to intervene. I calmly pointed out that her behavior was disrespectful and that her attitude towards me was inappropriate. I mentioned everything I had done for her recently, hoping to remind her that I was on her side and did not deserve such treatment. Her response left me stunned. It clearly showed that she did not consider me in a position to comment on her actions. It was not only the content of her words, but their biting and hurtful tone. It seemed deliberately designed to remind me of my marginal position in her life. I was stunned. After so much time, effort, and resources invested in helping her succeed, this was how she perceived me. Not as a father figure or even as a family member, but as someone without the authority to address her behavior. What happened next was even more painful. Maud was nearby and clearly heard the entire interaction. I thought he would intervene, back me up, or at least try to mediate. Instead, he sided with Remy. He basically confirmed that I lacked the authority to discipline his daughter and insinuated that I was overstepping my bounds by trying to do so. Those words hurt me more deeply than anything Remy had said. It wasn't just a momentary disagreement, but an explicit rejection of the role I believed I played in this family. That really hurt. I felt that all my efforts over the years, covering trips, extracurricular activities, tutoring, even his first car, were completely worthless. I have invested countless resources, energy, and funds in this family, only to be told that I have no say in my own home. Well, I thought, if I'm just the one who pays the bills, I'll start behaving like one. Herein lies the controversy. As I mentioned previously, I set up a college fund for Remy when Mord and I got married. This came exclusively from my personal resources, separate from Mord's finances, and without any contribution from Stan. I originally planned to cover a significant portion of Remy's higher education to give him a head start, but after that conversation, I began to reconsider my position. If I am not considered family enough to have a say in Remy's attitude, why should I be considered family enough to finance his university education? I decided to dissolve the university fund and redirect those resources to my retirement plan. I didn't immediately tell Remy and Mord to avoid appearing vindictive, but Mord found out when he checked the balance for an educational expense. She confronted me furiously, accusing me of using the money as a manipulative tool. She claimed that I was sabotaging Remy's future out of spite and that I was acting childishly. I explained that I was not sabotaging anything at all, simply reallocating my resources for my own future, since they obviously did not consider me part of theirs. Mord argued that my attitude was unfair, especially considering that Remy is still a teenager and does not fully understand the consequences of his actions. I replied that if he is old enough to disrespect me and remind me that I am not his biological father, then he is old enough to face the reality that I am not obliged to support him as if he were. Before anyone jumps to conclusions, I am not heartless. I have not abandoned Remy to his fate. I explained to Mord that if Remy really wants to pursue higher education, he can look for a job, apply for scholarships, or ask Stan to take responsibility for once. He has alternatives. He just won't have my free funding anymore. This decision has created a huge rift between Mord and me. She sees me as acting out of vindictiveness, while I feel I am simply setting necessary boundaries. Some of Mord's relatives think my reaction is excessive. However, from my perspective, I have been extraordinarily generous and have only received resentment and disrespect in return. I did not join Mord to be treated as a source of resources, and if my contributions are not appreciated, I will gladly step back and focus on my own well-being. So AITA, for transforming my stepdaughter's college fund into my retirement fund, after my wife and her daughter made it clear that I am not really part of the family. Update 1. I have noticed comments pointing out how I expressed myself when mentioning that I had invested money in Remy. I understand why it could be interpreted negatively, as if I were reducing her to a transaction or expecting compensation. That was never my intention. I did not dedicate all that time, effort, and resources with the expectation of compensation. I did not intend to generate debt or obligation. I did it because I sincerely believed I was part of this family, and that helping it to prosper was simply my responsibility as a member. What really hurts is not the financial aspect, but realizing that they never really considered me part of the family. Mord's words denying my parental authority were not limited to disciplinary matters. They represented a rejection of my place in their lives. For years, I thought we were building something meaningful together. I believed I was more than just a financier. I thought I represented a father figure and a husband whose contributions mattered. But when they treated me like an automatic dispenser of resources, what feeling did they hope to generate? If my only purpose is to provide, why not call it investment? Clearly, that is how they have seen it. Days after the conflict with Mord and Remy, I received a message from Stan. Our communications are rare, so it was unexpected. His message was concise. He wanted to meet to talk about Remy. Although unsure of his intentions, I accepted. Regardless of what had happened, I was still worried about Remy and thought I could share relevant information to help her. During our meeting, he began by being overly cordial, as if we were close friends. He tried to joke, laugh at irrelevant things, and seemed to flatter me. His attitude was uncomfortable and obviously false. After a few minutes of this insincerity, I asked him to reveal his true purpose. Then he dropped the act and asked me directly to reconsider Remy's university funding. According to him, my decision to reallocate the fund was selfish and ego-driven. He claimed that I was punishing Remy for typical adolescent behavior, allowing my pride to get in the way of his well-being. Hearing that accusation infuriated me. For years, I have been Remy's main financial support, while Stan barely did the minimum as a father. Yet there he was, accusing me of failing him. All I could do was remind him that he was Remy's real father, not me. If anyone had a responsibility to finance her education, it was him. He immediately adopted a defensive stance, claiming financial incapacity. I distrusted his excuse and confronted him. Stan has a stable job and could perfectly well afford his daughter's education if he really wanted to. The truth is that he simply prefers not to spend his money. For years, he has been content to let me assume most of the financial responsibilities, and now that I have retired, he is desperately trying to return that burden to me. I made it clear to him that it was too late to change my decision. I would not budge or back down. The college fund was no longer there and was no longer my problem. Then Stan made it worse. He started shouting, calling me names, and making me out to be the villain. I did not give him the reaction he was looking for. I remained calm, avoided participating in his theatrics, and withdrew when it became clear that the conversation was not progressing constructively. Since then, he has been constantly sending me messages. His communications range from attempts to make me feel guilty to subtle threats and appeals to my sense of responsibility. One moment she accuses me of ruining Remy's future. The next, she tries to take advantage of my historical concern for her. It's exhausting, but I refuse to give in. Stan has had multiple opportunities to support his daughter, and still has them. If he truly cares about her education, he will find a way to finance it personally. This situation has forced me to reflect deeply on my relationship with Mord, Remy, and even now with Stan. I don't consider my decision to dissolve the university fund to have been an easy one, but I do believe it was the right one. If Mord and Remy do not recognize me as a father figure, then I cannot continue to pretend to be one by financing their future. At this point, I feel that I have been evaluated from every possible perspective. I have tried to act correctly for years, even when my efforts went unnoticed or unappreciated, but I have finally reached my limit. I will not allow any more taking advantage of me, no matter how much they try to manipulate me emotionally. It's sad because I sincerely appreciate Remy and want him to succeed, but I have realized that my participation in his life has always been on their terms. They wanted my financial support but refused to grant me the corresponding respect or recognition. Now that I have set limits, everyone is upset, not because I am wrong, but because it is inconvenient for them. I stand firm in my decision. If they prefer to see me as an ATM, they will have to accept that I decide when the withdrawals end. Update 2. Recently, the situation with my wife Mord and her daughter Remy evolved unexpectedly. After all the controversy over the college fund, Remy decided not to continue with higher education. Mord immediately held me responsible for this decision, insisting that by dissolving the fund I had discouraged Remy by making her feel unprotected. Although I regret that Remy experiences these feelings, I do not understand how all this responsibility falls exclusively on me when her biological father, Stan, should have been actively involved from the beginning. Stan has been conspicuous by his absence in all the practical aspects of parenting, especially the financial ones. He has an excellent job that would allow him to pay for college, but as soon as my contribution stopped, everyone started acting as if Remy's academic future depended solely on me. I could not continue to ignore this injustice, so I questioned Mord directly about Stan's lack of financial participation. Shouldn't he, as the biological father, assume this responsibility instead of waiting for my intervention? Instead of acknowledging this argument, Mord avoided the subject. He insisted that I had disappointed Remy and that my decision to redirect the fund was selfish and spiteful. I felt that regardless of what I said, she rejected any attribution of responsibility for either herself or Stan. The conversation became frustrating with her constant evasions and prevarications until, during one of these heated exchanges, she revealed something that left me transfixed. In the midst of her frustration, Mord admitted that she believed that funding Remy's university education was my obligation because she had married me in search of financial security. At first, I doubted that I had heard correctly. It seemed the kind of exaggeration that someone makes during an argument, not a sincere admission. But there it was, unequivocal. I paused and asked for clarification of her statement. She stammered, tried to retract it without managing to offer a coherent explanation. That moment completely transformed my perspective. For years, I believed I was building a real family with Mord and Remy. I treated the girl as my own daughter, I supported her fully, and genuinely wanted her to succeed. I thought Mord and I were a team, but to hear her reduce our relationship to a financial arrangement, directly confessing that she considered me a means to achieve economic stability, was an absolutely unexpected betrayal. The revelation hit me hard. I had always sensed that my financial capacity significantly influenced Mord's interest in me. I tried to convince myself that it represented only one aspect of our relationship, but hearing her express it explicitly confirmed my worst fears. It wasn't about love, respect, or building a future together. I was simply someone who provided her with financial security, her main motivation. After organizing my thoughts, I told Mord that I could not continue in this relationship. If he truly perceived me as nothing more than a source of financial security, I refused to play that role. I informed him that I would no longer function as his ATM and that we needed to find new accommodation as soon as possible. I did not want to unnecessarily intensify the conflict, but neither would I allow the situation to continue. Since then, the reactions have been mixed. Several friends have shown solidarity, pointing out that Mord's confession clearly reveals his constant perception of me. They have reminded me how much I have done for Remy, especially in Stan's absence, and that I have every right to distance myself from a relationship where I am being used. One friend even pointed out that Mord never seemed to show any genuine interest in me as a person, but only in my material contributions, suggesting that it is better to cut ties now than to allow this dynamic to continue wearing me down. On the contrary, some family members think I am overreacting. They have suggested that perhaps Mord spoke rashly or expressed himself incorrectly due to the tension of the moment. They believe I should give him the benefit of the doubt and try to reconcile rather than request his departure. While I understand that perspective, it is difficult to ignore the clarity with which Mord expressed his position. His subsequent inability to justify himself only reinforces the idea that he expressed exactly what he thought. This situation has led to deep questioning. Did Mord really consider me a life partner? Was I just a convenient economic solution? Did Remy ever see me as a father figure or simply as someone who facilitated his comfort? Now that I have set limits by rejecting the role of financier, am I acting correctly or am I abandoning a family that could be saved with a different approach? Currently, I feel that I have done everything I can as a husband and stepfather. I have supported them financially and emotionally in every way imaginable, but now it seems that nothing mattered as much as my ability to cover expenses. It is a difficult reality to accept, and I do not know how to proceed from this point. Update 3. A few weeks ago, Mord and Remy left the house. Although it was not an easy decision, I knew it was necessary. For a while, I considered it to be the definitive end, until last week Mord contacted me requesting a meeting. Initially, I considered the meeting inappropriate, but in a moment of vulnerability, I decided to listen to her. I did not know what to expect, but I thought it would provide closure for both of us, in one way or another. We met in a restaurant for lunch. On seeing me, she began to cry almost instantly. She apologized profusely, acknowledging that she had acted incorrectly in treating me as a financial resource. She claimed to love me and could not imagine continuing without me. I listened to her tears and pleas for reconsideration, her expressions of regret, but regardless of her apparent sincerity, nothing changed for me. My mind constantly replayed the moment when he confessed to having married for financial security. I had secretly hoped that during our meeting, he would attribute that statement to an emotional outburst of frustration, denying that it represented his true feelings. But that never happened. On the contrary, he confirmed it, admitting the truth of his words. This confirmation was devastating. I had always intuitively known that my financial contributions were significant for Mord. I convinced myself that they were only a minor aspect of our relationship, that I represented something more than just a financial provider. However, hearing her express it so clearly, it was impossible to deny it. She had joined me in search of financial stability, and eventually that completely defined my identity in her eyes. I expected to hear her deny the sincerity of those words, attributing them to momentary anger. I wanted explanations, retractions, but none of that happened. She offered no justifications or clarifications. She simply reaffirmed her initial position. That moment was definitive. I allowed her to express herself fully, to apologize, and to attempt reconciliation. But when she had finished, I declared my desire for a divorce. I made clear the irreversibility of my decision. The reality of our situation was overwhelmingly clear. This could not be solved through conversation or apologies. It represented a fundamental problem. My personal valuation was exclusively linked to my capacity to provide. Mord persistently tried to change my mind, but I remained firm. I remained calm even when she became upset and pleaded desperately. I could sense her emotional distress, but I could not continue to ignore reality. Her confession that she had married mainly for financial security completely destroyed our relationship. It was not a simple slip of the tongue during an argument, but the painful truth. Making this decision was extremely difficult. I still have feelings for Mord, but the person I thought I knew is radically different from who he really is. Trust has irretrievably vanished. The most painful thing has been to understand that I was never truly recognized for my personal essence. Despite everything I did for Mord and Remy, the love and dedication I gave, the economic factor always prevailed. I gave them absolutely everything without ever achieving satisfaction. Now I feel I have lost part of my identity, but at the same time I feel liberated. I no longer need to pretend to accept such treatment. Since that meeting, calm has prevailed. I have hardly received any news from Mord, who continues to try to convince me to reconsider, without success. I do not believe it is possible to return to that dynamic, which would be a constant reminder of how little I am valued. I deserve more than to function as an economic network for someone. I deserve genuine companionship, not someone who perceives me as a source of income. Update 4. I have formally filed for divorce, and surprisingly, I did not anticipate the emotional difficulty. I assumed that once the decision had been made, the process would be easier, but the reality is more complex than I imagined. It involves much more than simple documentation and distancing. I am finding it more difficult to detach emotionally than I expected. Mord continues to contact me occasionally. Each communication follows the same pattern, trying to persuade me to reconsider, asking me to return and repair the relationship, expressing regret, declarations of love, and an inability to imagine his life without me. It's honestly exhausting. I understand his motivations, but they don't alter my position. I consistently reiterate my inability to return, the firmness of my decision, and the impossibility of changing it regardless of his words. I don't know exactly what I expected when I decided to get divorced, but I definitely didn't anticipate this experience. I thought it would clarify the situation, but it has only intensified my confusion. My life seems completely turned upside down as I try to figure out how to move forward. Update 5. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to those who have inquired about my well-being. I deeply appreciate all this support, which is invaluable during this difficult time. I have received messages from friends, family, and even people with similar experiences. The divorce is finally over. I honestly feel a remarkable sense of relief, although I am simultaneously processing a range of emotions. I did not anticipate that the consequences would be so challenging, but neither did I expect this feeling of liberation. Fortunately, the process was less drawn out than feared. We avoided court litigation, which was a huge relief. Everything was simplified thanks to a solid prenuptial agreement. Frankly, I am grateful that we had it. It made the division of assets much easier, ensuring it was handled quickly and fairly. I can't even imagine how much more complicated it would have been without it. I avoided the stress and uncertainty that come with protracted legal disputes. On the contrary, the process moved relatively quickly once the paperwork had been started. I consider this a small blessing in the whole situation. Mord, on the other hand, showed resistance to the outcome. Even in the final moments, he persisted in trying to persuade me to change my decision. He continued to express regret, declarations of love, and confidence in our ability to reconcile if I gave him another chance. I admit the emotional difficulty that these pleas represented. I experienced moments of doubt about my determination, questioning its correctness. But every time I listened to his pleas, I was reminded of the fundamental motivation for my decision. A few days before the divorce was legally finalized, Remy contacted me. She apologized for everything that had happened and hoped I would reconsider. Her approach was surprising considering our recent lack of communication and the tension during our last exchange. She seemed genuine and I partially wanted to trust her, but I knew that nothing would alter my determination. The decision had been made definitively, and no apology could repair what had happened. I replied thanking her for her gesture, making clear the irreversibility of my decision, sincerely wishing her future well. The most challenging aspect has been managing the emotional aftermath. It is not simply a matter of submitting documentation and legally finalizing the process. It has profound emotional consequences. I had not fully realized how much I had invested sentimentally in this relationship until its final conclusion, although it is logical considering our almost 11 years together. It was inevitable that it would be painful. Now, with everything radically transformed, I am experiencing strange feelings. I have no complete answers or absolute clarity about my future, but I am moving forward progressively, trying to refocus my life. So what is my current situation? Honestly, I'm just trying to reorganize my existence. It has been too much to process, and I am still adapting. Once again, I am deeply grateful for all the support I have received.